All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Barnyards and Backyards Live. I'm Jeff Edwards. I work for UW Extension. My co-host today, again, as always, is Jeremiah Vardaman. Good morning, Jeremiah.
Good morning. How we doing?
Hanging in there. Our technical support person, who you may not see, but might hear, is Jenny Thompson, and she will be working in the background to get us going on Facebook Live. Our guests today are Jess Butler from Converse County Weed and Pest. Good morning, Jess. Glad to have you here.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Very good. And Jenna Meeks from Goshen County Weed and Pest. We are always glad to have you back and visit us again. So
thanks.
Today's program, I think we're going to call it the 5 J's. Because we are all participating in a discussion about weed control. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you're new to Zoom or if you're not new to Zoom, if you take your mouse and scroll over the top of your page, you'll see a Q&A button or a chat button at the bottom. If you would like to interact and ask a question of us or make a comment, please use those two features and we will try to pull those questions ahead and get them answered for you. If and when we get to Facebook Live this morning, go ahead and ask your questions in the comment boxes, comment box, and one of us will pull those questions forward and try to get those answered for you. So with that, I think we're ready to get started, and I believe, Jenna, we're going to turn the floor over to you to begin the program, and then if I understand correctly, we are going to rotate between all of us to talk about specific weeds, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm trying to share my screen. Button.
There you go. It's going.
Okay. So with the alliteration following with the J's, I picked Wyoming's Worrying Weeds. And so these are the weeds that I think kind of get people down and out about weed control and think that it's impossible and you're not going to make any headway. So we're here to help you not get discouraged and to maybe give some helpful tips on some weeds that are troublesome for people here in Wyoming. So the criteria that we have for, quote, this list, we didn't want to be here all morning and ruin everybody's Friday. So we kind of narrowed it down to 11 different species, and they're listed under their Canada thistle. We cheated a little bit and grouped winter annual grasses all together, so that includes Downy, brome, Medusa head ventinata, field bindweed, Kochia, Dalmatian toadflax, hoary cress, also known as whitetop, common mallow, foxtail barley, plains pricklypear cactus, the tree species, which would be Russian olive and salt cedar, and then sagebrush, also group various species. So between Jeremiah, Jeff, and Jess, and myself, we will cover those. If you have questions about other weeds, please feel free to ask them, but these are the ones that we feel you would need to implement various control methods, and even with those methods, you might have to do it multiple times. And then various types of management, you need to, practice proper grazing management, irrigation, whatnot. So outside management, just other than the weed, is also important for keeping these weeds at bay. They also have great reproduction methods. So a lot of them will spread by seed and by roots. They can take over a landscape in a relatively short period of time if gone kind of unchecked. And then they also typically have a very high seed production, especially when we're talking about annual weeds. And then the final thing would, a lot of these are found in sensitive areas. So not saying that there shouldn't be other weeds on this list, but with the combination of, that they have surrounding vegetation is a good thing. You might actually not be able to get to some of these infestations if they're in a draw or somewhere like that, or if they, have a high impact to wildlife habitat, livestock, access to water, things like that. So there are also other weeds that may be difficult to control, but as a general list, these kind of trip us up a little bit more as far as misidentification, what control options are available, and what you shouldn't do is maybe more important sometimes than what you should do. So Any of you three other J's want to?
I think you nailed it, Jenna. I guess I would just emulate that. Yeah, there's a lot of weeds out there, but these are kind of the most common that we constantly hear from of people struggling or counties such as yourself with weed and pests kind of struggle with and are really focused on in control. And they're not the easy ones, right? They really take a lot of effort and a lot of specific control measures to get some kind of control or management on.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, these are on, barnyards and backyards, so we're not dealing with, granted, there is cheatgrass on large landscapes, but typically we'll see these, in smaller acreages, but also in lawn and garden that can even spread to, small pasture type setting and whatnot. So the control methods we might discuss are probably more appropriate for a smaller acreage than for a landscape scale. So just to keep that in mind with our audience. So I will move into the, go ahead.
Jenna, some of the control measures that we offer are available for turf and use in other situations.
Yeah, yep. So I will move into the first species, which is Canada thistle. Probably not unfamiliar to a lot of people. It is a perennial thistle, and it has a very large root system, as you can see on that top right picture that looks a lot blurrier than what it did on a small screen. So it does have an extensive root system. It stores a lot of energy in those roots, and that's what makes, one reason it makes this plant really difficult to control is you might see a lot of top above ground growth look sickly after you have a apply a control method, but those energy reserves are all in those roots and can really sprout back up there. So when we talk about controlling, what we do focus on quite a bit are some herbicide options, just because that is one way to get those root storage reserves kind of dwindled down in this plant specifically. So the herbicide options available for this one that we really like is called clopyralid, and there are various trade names for that. The active ingredient is called clopyralid.
Hold on, Jenna, sorry.
Yeah.
What is an active ingredient? Let's define that for everyone. Not all of us are savvy like us. We're not dealing with it on a regular basis.
Okay, so what I like to equate it to is if you go to the store and you buy Kleenex, that's a brand name. But what it actually is facial tissue. So clopyralid is what is the product is actually like the
it's the facial
help me out,
tissue.
Jeff.
It's the heavy hitter.
You guys talked over yourselves there. So, so the trade name or the brand name Kleenex would be similar to saying I'm going to use Stinger or Transline, and so that would be similar to the Kleenex. Whereas the clopyralid, which is the active ingredient, would be similar to calling it I'm going to go buy facial tissue. So when we say an active ingredient, what you really need to look for is that little tiny print on the label underneath that says what percentage of that facial tissue makes up the Kleenex. So clopyralid would be the active ingredient in Transline or Stinger.
So something folks might buy at the store would be Roundup, but its real active ingredient is glyphosate. But there are Roundup products that contain glyphosate and other active ingredients. And so they're going to do different things. So you really want to know what you're buying.
Yeah. There are some great guides on Barnyards and Backyards and other live videos that we have done that also discuss active ingredients. So.
Yeah, and probably the best definition I try and use is the active ingredient is actually the chemical within the product that does the control that we're hoping for. It's actually doing the control of the pest. So in this case, a weed. Yep.
So be careful with herbicide options because like I mentioned, even if the top growth looks like you've done a great job with control, you might have to come back for multiple treatments. And this would especially be true if you're going to do something like mowing for Canada thistle control. So you would need to mow multiple times for multiple seasons to get those energy reserves down. So there are non-chemical ways to control Canada thistle, but they do take a lot of diligence. And so when we talk about tillage with Canada, sorry, Jeff?
Sorry, some of those other options are considered harassment. You're just harassing them to death. You're trying to get them to regrow and use up their energy reserves in the rootstock, and then just continually mowing them and wearing them down. But the final result may be a herbicide application or two in order to get them fully under control.
And so one thing that we stress with Canada thistle is tillage is generally not recommended, as this plant can grow from very small, even up to as small as 1-inch root fragments. So if you are going to use a shovel and dig it up, make sure to not leave any root fragments that you're dragging all the way from where you dug it up to the dumpster or something like that. And make sure you're ready to dig down, anywhere from 15 to 20 feet. So we generally say that tillage and mowing are not efficient. That's not that they're not effective, but they're probably not the most efficient. And then the final one with Canada thistle is make sure to properly identify, because this is a perennial thistle, whereas a lot of thistle that we see throughout the state are what we call biennial thistles, and that would include musk, scotch, plumeless, thistles like that. So when you're talking about those type of thistles, the biennials, you can actually do tillage and mowing somewhat effectively because they only live for 2 years. And they're best sprayed in the rosette stage in the fall and the spring. And some similar herbicides work, but certain herbicides work better on Canada thistle and might not work as well on musk or scotch. So I would contact your local extension or weed and pest to get recommendations for your area specifically and timing, but really stress to not just say, I have thistle, and to properly identify what that thistle is, because your control methods will be significantly different.
Yeah.
Jenna, are there, I'm sorry, Jeremiah. Jenna, are there specific times when we should be applying herbicides to Canada thistle?
The general, what I like to tell people is anytime's a good time to kill a weed. So if you're really limited and you only have a 1-week window to apply a control method, that's probably generally better than not doing anything. But yes, there are better times. For Canada thistle specifically, we really like to apply it in the fall. So that plant is getting ready to go dormant for the winter. And so what it's doing is it's soaking up as much as it can, as much energy as it can from the sun right now, and it's storing all that energy in the roots. And so if you spray it in the fall, what it's going to move to that root system is the actual herbicide. And so that's why we choose herbicides that are active in the root system more so for Canada thistle than we would be worried maybe for some other biennial thistles. We want an herbicide that's going to be active in that root system. So fall is a great time, but like I said, if you're only going to be out there the first week of April, you can spray it then too.
Yeah, and I agree. And what I keep hearing you say, Jenna, is just that's what makes Canada thistle such a difficult weed to control compared to other thistles. It's just that extensive root system. Even though we mow off the top, chemically burn off the top of that weed, it constantly comes back from that root system. So it's going to be diligence of those control measures and then timing of those applications.
Yep.
I always tell landowners, a great time to spray Canada thistles when the cottonwood leaves start turning. That way, it's taking it into the roots there, and you can see it visually when, the cottonwood leaves are turning. You can probably go in and spray and you'll get a good kill.
Well, I like that recommendation.
Yeah, great, Jess.
I do too.
Yeah.
What's next?
Jess, just on a roll now, was going to talk about Downy brome.
Yeah, so the winter annual grasses, Downy brome is a big one. I think everyone has struggled with getting cheatgrass seeds in their socks and their shoe. You name it. It's kind of a booger. It's, in June when it starts turning, the hillsides are red, purple, and that's your cheatgrass. It's an annual grass. It's a winter annual grass, which means it germinates in the fall, gets a couple inches, goes dormant, and then it has that 2-3 inch head start come springtime, and it easily crowds out your desirable grass species. Where it cures out so fast, it changes the fire cycle in an area. You know, you look at historically in prairie sagebrush, prairie fire cycles are 50 to 60 years. Once that cheatgrass gets a high infestation, that fire cycle goes to 5 to 6 years. So it really transforms the landscape. For chemical options, you want to treat in the fall when, you know, pre-emergent or just post-emergent. There's a lot of different, well, a mazapic, which plateau panoramic would be the trade names on those, work really well. There's some new herbicides coming out too that look promising from Bayer, the active ingredients in dazaplan and the new chemicals called Rejuvera, and it works really well. It'll take time because it's such a prolific seed producer that you're going to have a seed bank, and it's not going to be a one and done application on that. What else?
For those that might have a little bit in their gardens, hasn't gone totally crazy yet. I've heard that it's a shallowly rooted kind of plant that's not bad to pull. So you're talking about that with the seed load. It's just something they have to pull, and then they just have to keep after it for several years.
Yeah, it'll pull really easy in a garden scenario, and yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Especially a garden where it's getting a lot of water and you know, the soil isn't too compacted. It'll pull right out, and it's just important, I think, to bag it up so those seeds aren't going anywhere else when you're mechanically pulling them out.
Well, that's a great point. I've heard some weeds, they can, even if you pull them when the seed is immature, they can go on to mature even after you pulled out the plant. Is that true?
You know, I would think, you know, any reserve energy in those roots, it's going to realize something's wrong and try to kick any bit of energy to the seed to go on for future generations and survive.
So yeah, I've heard for cheatgrass that once you see the seed ons in this image here, whether they're green or not, they're still viable.
Oh.
Okay.
Hammered him. Hard.
I think I would just assume that, you know, anytime there's a seed that you've not missed your window of opportunity, but I would treat it as a weed that can continue to spread. So yeah, with Canada thistle, once you start to see a little bit of purple right on the top, they say within 7 days that seed's viable. Well, I mean, that's debatable, I guess, what's purple and what's 7 days, and that's the temperature and whatever. So I would just treat every plant, and once you start to see anything that resembles a seed, that's what you have to deal with. Yeah.
Even if it starts flowering, you need to be getting rid of it before the flower cycle is completed.
The earlier the better, right? Yeah. And at least from my knowledge and what I've seen is if you're in a lawn setting or maybe a pasture setting and you get a little bit of cheatgrass coming in, if you can catch it early enough, you can actually utilize a little bit of mechanical like mowing to suppress that. But it's really time sensitive, really time specific. And so you're going to be doing that in the springtime. And once that cheatgrass is throwing up a seed head trying to go to seed, you're wanting to mow that off as much as you can. The concern always with annual weeds, they are just tenacious, right? They can throw a seed head underneath your mowing height even. And so they're just really, really well adapted. And so to get effective control, usually you have to go to a herbicide in that instance. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you see some people that, you know, before it sets seed, you know, it's palatable, but once it gets that seed head on it, you know, nothing's going to eat it. You know, they're going to look for something else. So.
Oh, that's a good point, Jess. Yeah, grazing it there in the fall time or early spring before it throws up any seed head. You can do that with sheep. Horses will even graze it a little bit. Cattle, yep, it's useful that way. But once that seed head gets up, it gets a little tough. Those ons just turns off the palatability. So, yep.
And one of the things about herbicides, if we choose to use them, is that when plants are actively growing and we apply herbicides, they're going to be more effective because that plant is taking in all of that product and trying to figure out what to do with it. And if it can't process it, it usually dies.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, so when this plant turns purple and has seed heads on it, it's at the end of its life. The herbicides are not going to be as effective as if it was not, didn't have a seed head yet. The other thing I would, and maybe you already covered this, Jess, I don't want to step on your toes or anything, but if we're in a perennial grass system and we have this annual grass in there, that really limits our options and abilities there. But that's when we want to look at a pre-emergent herbicide. And what that means is it's a soil active herbicide. It lays in the soil and kills all germinating seeds in that soil surface. And usually we want to apply that for this one in particular in the fall.
Yes.
Because that's when those seeds are germinating. But if those seeds have already germinated and those seedlings are up and actively growing, those pre-emergent herbicides do not have any effect or control on them.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, if you do a chemical control on it, I think if you have the space to kind of let those pastures rest a little bit, let those perennial good grasses go to seed and help kind of fill in those areas where the cheatgrass or other grasses, undesirable grass species have taken over. So, you know, more good grass is better than bad grass.
Definitely. Yep. What's next?
We're going to stay on the same track here and talk about the big bad brothers of Downy brome.
Okay, hold on. Before we do that, we had a question on Canadian thistle that I didn't able to get in when we were talking about that one. And so I just want to query the group here. A question comes from Lynn. Can I use Canadian thistle for anything like eating or any other, is there any other benefit to it? At least to me, I do not know of anything that way. It's pretty spiny, pretty nasty stuff in all stages of growth. I'm not aware of any. Do you guys know of any?
I think you'd have to cook the heck out of it to make it palatable.
I found a meme on the great World Wide Web that somebody had a thistle leaf in a sandwich. So, you know, if you're backpacking and you get really hungry, I'd maybe pick a pretty young leaf where the spines aren't too pokey, but it was on the internet, so it has to be true. People use it as lettuce.
I think there's better options than Canadian thistle.
Yeah, I think I'd want to try it a little closer to home in case I had a digestive problem with the Canada thistle. I don't think I'd want to be out.
I think I can add a little bit to that. I believe, if I remember correctly, when I was a Boy Scout, they suggested that if you were in the woods, you could actually eat musk thistle. As long as you peeled the leaves off of it and got the spiny bits out. And yes, it does work. It tastes a little bit like celery, but it's not the same as Canada thistle.
So I've texted one of our educators that wrote an article for the Barnyards Backyards magazine that's on eating weeds, and I'll see if he has a response later, and I'll put a link to that article in the chat box here soon. Great,
thank you, Jenny. Let's go on to the next one.
So yeah, going with Downy brome. These are two nasty winter annual grasses. You know, just recently in the last couple of years, they've been found in the state, shared in multiple counties, I guess. But ventonata and Medusa head grass. The ventonata, these grasses, very similar life cycle to that of cheatgrass. Control options very similar as well. These two grasses, though, are higher silica content, so they are not palatable to the to livestock, wildlife, etc. And because of the high silica, they create a lot more thatch. So you get a big duff pile there, which really accelerates the fire cycle. The identification on the ventonata grass, on the seed head, the awns, it has a bent on. You can kind of see it in the picture here. And then Medusa head, it can be Medusa with snakes going out of Medusa's head. The seed heads go like that. The awns are longer on the Medusa head. The higher up on the seed head you go than on lower. Ventonata, when it cures out, it just turns yellow. They say it has a silverish sheen to it, and it really stands out in a landscape basis. And Medusa head, before it cures out, it has a light yellowish green hue that you can kind of see in large populations in a landscape scenario. It's one of those things that I think if you think you might have one of these species, let your weed and pest or your extension office know about it so we can get on it quickly, because they are nasty.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And kind of new to the area, the last 3 or 4 years, I believe they finally were first identified over in the Sheridan County area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're wanting to know where it is. So if you think you do have it, let us know. We'd like to know about it, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Jess or Jenna, what are the primary means of spread for these weeds?
I think they're carriers. You know, you walk through a place and they get stuck in your boots or on the hem of your jeans or something, and they'll hitchhike away. I think is the main purpose for humans. I'm sure it's the same with animals, digesting and letting them out, passing them through elsewhere. So I think it kind of brings up a point when you're in an area where there's weedy species, before you leave, really check your pants, your boots, make sure you aren't carrying those seeds around and creating new infestations elsewhere.
Yeah.
All right, we ready for the next one?
Yeah, I think the honor goes to Jeff.
Okay, before you do that, I got a clarification from Jenny on the Canadian thistle question. So the stems of Canada thistle are sometimes consumed once the leaves and spines have been carefully removed off of it. So it's the stems, not necessarily the leaves, that can be consumed on Canadian thistle. But at least for me personally, I'm not that hard up. I'm not going to go through all that trouble. So
I think it'd be important to know too, if you were going to consume those, I would do so before spraying.
Yeah, good point.
Yes.
Very good point, Jess.
Yes, herbicide free.
Yes.
Go ahead,
All
Jenna.
right. Jeff's going to talk about field bindweed.
So bindweed is one of, I personally don't have an issue with bindweed on my property, but it is one of the ones that I work diligently to keep away from my property. This particular one, similar to Canada thistle, has a really extensive root system. Once it gets there, it is really difficult to get rid of. So you may see this alongside of the roads. It's, I'm trying to think of the common morning glory. So it's related to morning glory that people plant in their landscapes. Sometimes they think that what they have is morning glory, but it's actually field bindweed. And it's a climber. If there isn't anything to climb on, it grows relatively flat, but it will climb up plants and possibly strangle them out. It forms really large masses, colonies. And Jenna has placed on this slide, the seeds remain viable for greater than 50 years. So when Jess mentioned the seed bank earlier, if you have these things going to seed, I kid people that you actually have a legacy plant that you are giving to your children later in life and their grandchildren probably too. So some of the things that you can try to do to manage these things, there is limited success with some biological control agents, and we've listed them here. There's a tortoise beetle, there's a gall-forming mite, and a moth that are available. I have seen people have limited success with the gall-forming mite. That can be purchased from the folks, I believe, at New Mexico State University. There may be other sources as well. The problem is none of these 3 species will actually overwinter in Wyoming. So if you have an infestation of this particular weed, you need to repurchase the items, reintroduce them, those types of things. It was noted that hogs and chickens will actually consume field bindweed, whereas cattle and horses won't touch it. So there are livestock that will graze on it. But it's important to note that your other option, your other management tool available to you would be applying herbicides. And on the right-hand side of this particular slide, we've listed the herbicides that have known efficacy against field bindweed. I think it's aminocyclo. I got caught up, didn't I? Aminocyclo. Pyrachlor. Thank you.
Say it real fast.
I know if you got to say it really fast and mumble through it, and then everybody thinks it's what it is, right? Clopyralid, chlorsulfuron, dicamba, imazapic, imazapyr, metasulfuron, picloram, which is a restricted use product and you need to have a license for, triclopyr, and of course glyphosate, which is non-selective, so you'll kill everything that's out there, and then 2,4-D. A lot of these things need to be applied before this weed goes into what is known as the vining stage. Otherwise, you're just kind of harassing it, and you'll have to work on it again the following year. A lot of these things need to be combined in order to work well. So 2-way combinations or 3-way combinations of these particular products work very effectively for controlling it. The folks at UNL in one of their bulletins suggested cultivating, tillage, or disking, but there was a caveat. You have to do it every 2 weeks because like Canada thistle, it has a really extensive root system. It can be spread through those means very effectively if you are not diligent about controlling it. So cultivating, tillage, or disking are really not recommended for control because you'll spread them around even farther. And then the biggest thing to not do is not allow them to go to seed. Right now, all of these things are blooming along the roadsides. It's a little bit too late to try to get them under control. Your best opportunity would be for next year, unfortunately. So what's after field bindweed, unless there are some questions?
I was just going to throw out there with field bindweed, one of the most difficult parts, at least where I see it in a lawn or a garden setting or that, is when you're around perennial broadleaf plants. So trees or flowers, that a lot, these herbicides are also going to impact those. So you got to be very careful and make sure your timing of those herbicides are accurate.
So what I do in the instances where I see this particular weed show up is I have a small hand squirt bottle that I mix up appropriately the amount that I need. And then I specifically target the weed itself. I don't spray it anywhere else other than on that particular weed.
And I've used glyphosate on it, and I basically have it in a small container, and I have a paintbrush that you'd use for like artists, and I just wear gloves and I paint it on the leaves, and so you've got really targeted application. You don't get it on your ornamental plants that you want to still live.
Jenny, you bring up a really good point. Always wear the protective equipment that's recommended on the label. Right. So there's also another formulation that's similar to similar to the idea of painting it on. Apparently you can get glyphosate in a solid stick form. It looks
like a deodorant stick.
It looks like a deodorant stick. It's an oversized deodorant stick. You do not want to use it as deodorant, but that's the formulation that is available for it. And Jess, you look puzzled. You've not seen that formulation?
I haven't seen the glypha stick.
Yeah, I've used it. It's pretty handy. It's just got a button at the bottom. Mine's a gel formulation, and so it just pumps it up very much like a deodorant stick, and then you just wipe it and apply it to whatever you want it on. So it's really good. We have a question from Michelle. If I understand correctly, the herbicides are most effective early in the season. Similar to the discussion of Canadian thistle, I've heard people having success in the fall when the plants are drawing nutrients in the winter. Is that a myth?
So it's not a myth. It depends on the weed, actually. So a fall application of 2,4-D on dandelions, for instance, is probably the best way to control dandelions. And also some of the applications on some of the thistles after there has been a frost or a freeze in the fall is also a good way to try to control them as well. So Jenna or Jess, do you have other thoughts? It's weed dependent. It really is.
Yeah.
How about on field bindweed? An application in the fall, is that possibly more effective than the spring because of that extensive root system?
I will say some of that would be then herbicide dependent, which herbicide you're choosing. If you're picking an herbicide that is active in the roots, fall application is great. If you're picking an herbicide that is not very active in the roots, such as glyphosate, I would say a spring or summer application. Not that you can't apply that in the fall as well, but you're gonna see more efficient control in the spring or summer with glyphosate than you would with an herbicide that's active in the roots. Another one I would add to that list, especially in the fall, would be quinchlorac.
Yep.
That's the active ingredient, and you'll find that in a lot of ready-to-use products in stores like Barnyards or Tractor Supply Company. And so again, in that list of active ingredients, if you look for quinchlorac, that'll be really effective on field bindweed.
Great. All right, I think we're ready for the next one.
That's over to you, Jeremiah.
Oh, great. Kochia. Everybody likes Kochia. Yeah, so Kochia, it's an annual plant. We've already talked about a lot of annuals. The big thing with annual plants are that they have a very weak root system. They do not expend much energy in that root system because they're not going to come back from the roots year after year after year like perennials. And so with Kochia, that is one benefit to it. So that lower right-hand picture is a seedling Kochia plant coming up. They're very hairy, or also called pubescent. Those leaves will have very fine hairs on them. And this is one of our tumbleweeds here in Wyoming. We have numerous types of tumbleweeds, but this is just one of those. And that's how they distribute their seeds across the area. So it is an annual. They reproduce by seeds, not through the root system. And so in the fall, winter time period, the stem will break off at the ground and the wind will blow and move these tumbleweeds around, and they will deposit their seeds. And they are a very prolific seed generator. And so they just move a lot. And so this makes it very challenging to control because, for instance, I can be very diligent and control Kochia on my property, but if my neighbors or other lands adjacent to me do not have good control of Kochia, I can be constantly invaded by this species, and it's just a constant battle to get them. Then on top of it, at least from my experience, what I've seen is Kochia has a very long germination window. So here in the Bighorn Basin, those seeds germinate usually in the spring, but I'm still seeing here in the last month, I've seen new flushes of Kochia coming up especially after a rainstorm has gone through. And so you can be very diligent, get out there and get a good control on that, on Kochia, but the next moisture event, precipitation event, next irrigation can germinate a new set of seeds, and it just has a long window. So you're just constantly controlling this as you go on in the year. So treatment, most effective, if you're going to do herbicide control, is anything under 4 or 6 inches of stature. So you want that to get up out of that rosette form, just like that lower right-hand picture, before you make that application. You need to have enough leaf surface area to absorb that chemical, for one. But if it starts getting above 4 inches, 6 inches, somewhere in there, your herbicide controls are not going to do as well. The other aspect with Kochia is that we have glyphosate-resistant Kochia in Wyoming. I know of it here in the Bighorn Basin. I haven't heard it necessarily for the rest of the state. So some of our herbicides, these weeds are becoming resistant or tolerant of those herbicides. So you can spray them, and those weeds will show some symptoms and effect to them, but they will respond and continue to grow through that control measure and not be stopped. That is of a big concern. And so with that, when we're talking about these herbicide controls, you want to rotate chemistry. So we've talked about the different active ingredients. That's how you know you're actually rotating. And there's actually a thing called mode of action that you need to be aware of with those herbicides. So you need to move actual mode of action, and that's how that chemical controls that plant, what aspect of the plant it's actually controlling. So we got to either mix those chemicals in our tank, or we need to rotate those chemicals so we don't build up resistance in an area. And this applies for agriculture property, but also for our homeowners as well. So we can see it in every aspect of it. The big thing is don'ts, right? What do we not want this plant to do? A lot of our weeds do escape ornamental planting. I don't know why anybody would want to plant this as an ornamental myself, but then once that escapes, it becomes a weed in other areas and infestations. Grazing and haying at certain times can cause nitrate toxicity, and so that's a concern for livestock. It will kill certain species of animals if those nitrate levels get too high and those animals get too much of a dose of that nitrate. It can kill some individuals. So with that, that's what I have to share on kochia. Any input?
So if it's an annual, and folks have it in their like vegetable garden or ornamentals, and they don't have a huge infestation, is pulling pretty effective on it?
Thank you, Jenny. I skipped over that. I apologize. Yes, it is very effective, and the sooner you can do it, the better. So if you can do it before it produces seeds, and those seeds are in the top right corner, they look kind of like little feathers or very wispy projections off of that plant. So if you can pick them and just pop those roots out of the ground, you want to get right below the soil surface where it breaks that root. It's done. It does not grow back from those roots. The other thing I would mention is that's kind of what Jess was saying. This time of year, these weeds start shutting down. They mature out. The drier conditions start pushing them to maturity. They don't absorb chemical very well. So chemical controls kind of become less effective, mainly because the plant won't absorb it. And so if you can physically remove them, is your best option. So like on my property for specific, I'm going around hand pulling a lot of these kochia, and they're real easy to pop. They break right off at the ground, or you can pop up the little root.
So Jeremiah, you question the planted as an ornamental type of thing here, or comment here, and I know an organic pumpkin producer who actually will harvest the largest kochia they can find on their property, spray paint it either gold or silver, and use it as their Christmas tree.
There you go. No, it's for everyone, but that's just for me. That's not what I'd be growing.
I understand.
I think a lot of times too with kochia, places where it becomes an issue is where there isn't good competition, whether that's in the garden next to a corral, where you're seeing a lot of kochia. I think there's lack of competition. So if you're not wanting, or if you're finding it in the pasture, maybe you need to overseed it to try to get some more competition to keep it out of there.
I've had really good luck with that. I had some areas in a tree row that it was fill dirt. I had kochia move in, and then I've overseeded with grass and allowed that grass to go to seed, and it's finally pushing out the kochia and out competing the kochia. Sorry, Jenna, I muted you because we were getting a little feedback from Jeremiah through your screen. So
Gotcha. Sorry.
You're okay.
All righty. Next one up, I think I'll go through fairly quickly, is Dalmatian toadflax. And it's a perennial, again, like a lot of species here that are difficult. It has really waxy leaves. Again, like Jeremiah said with the kochia, it just makes herbicide a lot more difficult to move into the plant. It's an aggressive spreader. We've kind of always said it's spread mostly by roots, but here in Goshen County anyway, and maybe other people can chime in, we've seen a lot of it spread by seed. It's just a random 1 to 2 plants here and there. So we're also having to deal with that. Found in rangelands, roadsides, disturbed areas. So, you know, when a pipeline comes through and disturbs it, they do reseed, but that seed bank then is disturbed and can germinate there. So dues for this plant, sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do the flowers look like snapdragons?
They do. So that would be their identifying characteristic. There's also another species, I guess I should have just said toadflax in general. There's yellow toadflax throughout the state, in certain areas of the state as well. The leaf shape is the most distinguishing factor between Dalmatian and yellow, so you can certainly look that up online, and that's why I've put the scientific name under all of these, is to just be wary of the internet and kind of, if you type in a weed, don't just take the first picture that pops up on the image search, and make sure you search for the scientific name as well. That gives you a little bit better sources, I think, that pop up as far as management and descriptions and pictures for these plants. Yeah.
Is the management between the Dalmatian and the yellow toadflax any different?
They would be very similar. Yellow is a little bit easier just because that leaf is not as waxy. So Dalmatian's a little bit tougher, and I think a little bit more widespread. It adapts to drier environments better than yellow toadflax. So that's what we deal with mostly over here, and I think yellow toadflax is around. Dalmatian, I think, is maybe a little bit more of an avid spreader. And so what we're saying with that plant especially is to scout and treat for individual plants and small patches as much as possible. The don'ts would be tillage. Again, it can spread by those root fragments, and fire has been found to not be effective. So overgrazing can also increase the rate of spread. So as Jess mentioned with competition, just make sure your rangelands and your pastures are very healthy. And that's not to say you won't get weeds, but it won't allow them to spread as quickly. So toadflax control, we see really good luck in the fall with some, again, root active herbicides. So the trade names here I'm going to give would be Tordon, Telar, and throw a little bit of 2,4-D in there if you're adding those in the summer. Escort is another one that people use a lot, and hopefully we might see some luck with some new herbicides that have come out. Jess already mentioned it, to control maybe some of that seed spread, which would be the Rejuvra product. Yeah.
So I think I remember one of our weed specialists, previous one, talking about controlling some on his property. He just had some, he didn't have a ton of it. And he talked about using a shovel to go down and pop the, basically lower down on the root. And he said that would control it. Is that true, or am I misremembering the weed?
I would say that's not a bad method if you have, one or two plants. I would just be really certain that you're going deep enough. And in some of these rangelands where toadflax can establish, you might not be able to get a shovel deep enough to,
for sure,
it's going to be pretty dry, so that would be very dependent. There are actually several, there are a couple biocontrol agents available. And what that does is, we haven't seen it necessarily wipe out a population of toadflax, but what it does is it weakens it enough that maybe some of these other control methods would then be even more effective. So contact extension or weed and pest, because some of those biocontrol methods are really great, especially for areas that are hard to access, or that you might not walk by every day. If you have a rangeland, that it's hard to get to. That's where that biocontrol is really going to help you out.
Were those weevils or beetles, something along that line?
They're weevils, yeah. Yep.
Well, and if you're going to go with a shovel method, if you are able to dig down deep enough and pop it out, you'll want to bag it and remove it from the area. You don't want to just drop it, because now you're just it's just perpetuating from the seed that is viable on that plant.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions on toadflax?
I think we're good.
We will move over to Jess.
All right, so yeah, we have hoary crest now, or white top is generally what we call it around here, I guess. What most landowners identify it as. Has a white top when it flowers, 4 small petaled flowers in clumps, and it gets a white top. It's a perennial species. It gets about 1 to 2 feet tall. With this one, it spreads by seed and by root segment, parts of the roots, similar to the toadflax, like Jenna was talking about. So you want to spray it early. It's one of the earliest weeds that come out. Generally, when our crews are here, that's one of the first weeds we go after, is the white top. And then, you tilling it, mowing it, not going to be near as effective as a herbicide treatment early. I guess the herbicide uses, or herbicides you'd like to use would be your metsulfuron, closulfuron, open site would be another one that would work fairly well on it. Once it flowers out, it does stand out, you know, covering up fields. A lot of times you'll find it riparian areas or along irrigation ditches, which brings up a whole another issue because you don't want to get any herbicides in those waters. Yeah.
This is one I've personally done battle with in my landscape. It's spread around Laramie pretty prolifically. And so I used Roundup or glyphosate again with that painting method. I tried to pull it for several years and I made almost no headway because it's got teeny tiny little roots. And so when you pull it, they snap off and then it just regrows from the roots over and over and over again. So but the glyphosate was pretty effective.
Yeah, any of those roots that are in the ground, or you're going to get another batch in the next year. It's going to be an ongoing fight. I think a lot of these perennial species, you can never consider it a one and done application and walk away. You're going to have to keep on going back and monitoring and keeping an eye out to try to keep these weeds under control. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add on that.
I think you nailed it. You know, most of those early spring herbicide treatments are once it's emerged, it's actively growing, right? Like you said, Jess, it's one of our first ones in the spring. It's part of the mustard family, and it will flower for quite a long time, setting a lot of seed. And so you got to get to it kind of early. And at least the applications I'm aware of, you want to hit it in that early stage to blooming stage. If it gets too far into blooming stage, the applications just aren't as effective. The plant's kind of gone dormant and shut down, so it doesn't absorb that chemical as much. But also, you've already produced a lot of viable seed to continually spread. But the extensive root system just makes it, you got to be persistent with it. You might knock it down, but if you don't stay on top of it, it'll come right back.
All righty. We kind of want to maybe start moving through them a little quicker, or kind of maybe skip to the end and go back if we have other time for
Let's
weeds?
go a little quicker and try and get through them if we can.
Oh, of course. Get to me and then got to go a little quicker.
You can talk fast.
So, but I wanted to linger on common mallow because I learned a lot while I was researching it. So common mallow is an interesting weed because it is actually entirely edible. It was used or can be used as as a thickening agent, kind of like okra in stews and soups. But then the little seed buttons that it's down here in the lower right are also edible as well. Now, the caveat to that is apparently you don't want to wait until those things are mature because the nitrate level in them can be toxic if you eat enough of them. So it's that there's a little bit of a balance there, but I wanted to get that in because of Lynn's question earlier.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
The other interesting thing is that marshmallow, the things that we eat, the things that we grill, one of the original ingredients in the original formulation came from this particular plant. So I think they've changed it to more sugar now, but who knows, right?
But that's maybe where it gets its name, marshmallow.
Yeah, right. Exactly. There is a variety of mallow called marsh, and then they took that name for the food item. Anyway,
I like marshmallows even less now.
I was going to say it's also related to hollyhocks.
Right, it's related to hibiscus, cotton, other things. To me, when it's growing, it looks like a geranium. I think people confuse this with or call it a wild geranium, something like that. You can pull it, but you have to pull it before the plants get large because it does have a large taproot that can regrow. You can apply pre-emergence down to control it where the seeds have been put out. And there's a list here of items to use. And then some post-emergent products have also been listed on the slide too that are, we've seen a little bit similar listing as in the bindweed list as well. But again, it's one of those things where it's helpful if you combine multiple products with different modes of action to help get it under control.
I just wanted to mention, anybody who's interested sees something and didn't quite catch it, this should be recorded, so you should be able to watch it later and catch what you missed.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the don't would be, don't allow it to go to seed. Keep it from doing that. So if you wanted a faster version, Jeremiah, there you go. Anybody have any other comments about mallow?
I don't, but I you know, and that's what you're going to hear, that don't allow it to go seed. That's straight across the board for all weeds. It doesn't matter if it's a perennial or an annual. If you can control seed spread, that's first part of the battle, I think, against weeds. Is just keep them from reproducing and spreading as much as you can. No,
All
I'm
right.
good, Jeff.
Keep going, Jeremiah, on foxtail barley.
Okay, foxtail barley. So this one, it is a perennial grass, and so sometimes we'll see it in some certain areas, specifically in like our lawns or a perennial grass. May it be a hayfield or a pasture, something like that. That's where it really becomes a problem and a nuisance. In other areas that are non-crop areas or that, it's not a big deal. In terms, it's easy to control there. So it is a perennial plant. It is susceptible to tillage. So if you are in a crop field, so if you're in an annual cropping system or in a non-crop field where you're able to do some tillage or mechanical, it will control it. When they say mechanical, it's more the tillage, disturbing of the root systems. It's not mowing. So this is a grass. It tolerates mowing really, really well. Then the other aspect would be chemical control. The foxtail barley is reproduced by seeds. It doesn't really spread extensively through root systems, even though you'll see patches kind of grow a little bit bigger each year if you leave it uncontrolled. So it is growing by root systems, but you don't see it like field bindweed or some of those others that extensively grow through the root system. So controlling the seed heads really help. You can graze this plant before it gets into the seed head. There is forage value to it. Animals will eat it, but the palatability drops off really quickly once it starts putting up those seed heads, as you can see it. And it looks like barley a little bit. And this one also is mistaken for Medusa head. If you don't know what you're looking for, those long-ons, people just see it and, oh, is that Medusa head? These are two different species, so be able to ID those. If you need help, contact your extension office or weed and pest. They're commonly found in wet, marshy areas in your fields, or especially alkaline soils or alkali patches in those soils. So if you're having that in your field, that's a drainage issue. And a lot of times that's why this plant can outcompete other grasses there, because those soil conditions do not allow for good perennial plants. One plant, one grass in particular that helps control this is, would be, blanking on the name, Garrison creeping foxtail. So it can crowd out and outcompete foxtail barley and does well in an alkaline soil. Herbicide controls, if it's in a perennial grass and you're spraying this, anything you apply as a herbicide is going to have injury to your perennial desired plants or grasses there. So you're going to want to use maybe a spot spraying type method to control this grass in that. What else?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we had a question. Debbie asked, is this grass related to pampas?
Pampas.
Pampas. I don't believe it is related. I don't know specifically.
I'm not a taxonomist. Somebody else gonna have to tackle that one.
Deal with that one. I'm not aware that it is, but I don't know specifically.
Yeah. All righty. I'm just gonna go really fast through this pricklypear. As with most cactus, what we need to be most aware of is that if you're choosing an herbicide treatment, spraying at full bloom stage is the most effective. You can use about half of the rate that if you're spraying other than full bloom stage. So try and target a full bloom stage if you're using herbicide, and also allow for about 3 years to see full control and full efficiency of that herbicide. So just be very patient, and that herbicide will usually do the trick. If you're going to remove it mechanically, they can reproduce from the pads. So if you have a shovel and you're just going to go hack it, make sure that those pads completely dry out, or again, remove them from the field. So if you're going to use fire, that can be effective. It bursts those cell membranes a little bit, but the fire needs to be really hot and really concentrated. So there are some other control methods. It just kind of depends on what's around you and how fast the wind is blowing that day.
And then, Jenna, you can eat them after you've fried off all the spines.
You can, yeah. Another good edible one. So, all righty. I stuck Jess with the tree species.
All right, so there's 2 different tree species that can be considered, well, that are weeds. First, you have Russian olive. A lot of times you'll see both of these, you'll see riparian areas with Russian olives. They, I think everyone who's floated the river, whether it was fishing or just a fun little tubing trip, has had the unfortunate opportunity of getting tangled up in these thorny boogers. For control, you can, when they get big and established, cut stump treatment I really is one of the methods I really prefer. You cut it, you spray the stump within 15 minutes. I guess you can masticate them, but then you're going to be going and treating a lot of regrowth after the fact. These trees will choke out along the river, make the river inaccessible for wildlife, livestock, etc. Salt cedar, tamarask is what it's also known as.
Just before you move on to salt cedar,
yes, sir.
You said masticate as a type of control. To me, that means chewing. What do you mean by that?
You can get big grinder heads that basically grind down these trees and just to the stump, and then after that's done, in the next year you have to go and treat it with a pricklypear mix.
Okay.
Cut stump, you can use multiple, a Roundup solution or a habitat, which like similar to a mazapir. But yeah, I think with mastication, you get a lot of regrowth.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but I just thought we needed to clarify that.
No, that was good. Jeremiah, did you have something?
I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm handling some questions in the chat box while you're talking. So
right,
no, you're doing great.
So the next one is salt cedar. It looks similar to a willow, but it'll get pink blooms on it. It will drink a lot of water. A mature salt cedar plant can drink up to 110 gallons of water a day. So if you think, a creek bottom that's totally choked out, there's not going to be any water. These plants will really drink up the water. Also, this plant will throw salt in the soil, which isn't good for other plants or desirable species. For treatments on these, you can do a basal bark treatment with a bark penetrator and trichlopear, or there's some people that will cut it down and then treat the stumps of it as well. Yeah.
Both of them are just tenacious trees. They're just really tough. And even if you do, at least from my experience, Jess, even if you do the proper chemical control or proper control measures like that, you're saying you cut down the whole physical tree and you treat the stump and all that, you still get suckers the next 2-3 years. It's just diligent control in those areas to finally get a handle on it.
Mm-hmm.
For any tree species to thrive in Wyoming, they have to be hardy, and for these species to be a weed, they're really stout and hardy. So they are a battle. with salt cedar, I've seen, I guess, reservoirs where on a dry year where the reservoir level was down, you can just see the water line year after year where there's a line of salt cedar along the banks.
And crowding out any native species there. They just, both of these species just outcompete native species. They're just very efficient plants.
Yes.
Great. What's our next one, Jenna?
That's on you, Jeremiah, if I can get
Me
the
with
clicker in the right
sagebrush?
spot. Yep, for sagebrush.
All right.
Controversial as it is.
Controversial. I guess I get all the controversial stuff. I just leap at them. So yeah, with the controversial, why is this controversial? First thing, most of these are native to Wyoming, right? I believe you down in the southeast corner have the sand sagebrush. I don't know of it up here in the northwest, but I'd have to look into that. But fringe sagebrush, big sagebrush, they all can be found throughout the state and in various places, right? And there are various reasons people want to remove that sagebrush from the landscape. And that, in our historical days here in Wyoming, that was homesteading at its finest, right? We came in to the sagebrush prairies, broke that out, and then cultivated our crops in that. The big thing first, identification that would really help you. Some of the control measures, especially like for fringe sagebrush, is a little bit different than big sagebrush, silver sagebrush, and sand sagebrush. The big things are mechanical control. So fire is a good one. So the Forest Service, BLM, they do a lot of habitat rehabilitation projects and use control fires to control these woody species. So a good fire in the area, but fire is not always conducive. So if you're in maybe a subdivision area, maybe you have 1 acre to 5 acres or somewhere in there, fire might not be your best option. Other options, getting a big mechanical brush hog or something like that and mowing these species down can help. Some of the difficulty with that is they leave some stump material behind that makes that area really, it's not smooth, it's not even that way. I would not go into a mechanical control if you had the ability to till up that ground. It's really hard. The root systems of these sagebrush, especially really mature old sagebrush, are really tough on mechanical equipment. And so it's really a mechanical control of the top growth. And then also there are chemical control options out there that are available for that. And so I'm going to pull up, let's see. So just as an example, 2,4-D LV ester is recommended for sand sagebrush. Tordon is really good, especially for fringe sagebrush and for big sagebrush. 2,4-D LV ester is the same for big sagebrush and sagebrush seedlings. So utilizing those, they will work really effectively. You want to wait in the spring, kind of a late spring, early summer time period, once they put on new fresh leaves, so they are able to absorb as much chemical as possible. This time of year is not a good time for controlling sagebrush in a chemical fashion. So you're looking at more mechanical. Also overlapping those chemical controls can really help you by mowing off an area that you don't want that sagebrush in, then coming back in if there is regrowth, and then applying a herbicide. So that's what I have for sagebrush. Any thoughts or questions on that one?
I think you got it covered.
Great.
Yeah. So I think the last slide we have here is just kind of a overview of what we talked about. And I know we didn't cover, again, all of the weeds that are considered weedy. And why we picked these difficult to control ones is the typical control methods, maybe avoiding herbicides is just not possible with some of these. And so we realize that there are options for other weeds and whatnot, but a lot of these do really rely on multiple control methods, whether that's cultural and mechanical, cultural and pesticides. And so just want to kind of reiterate that there are other weeds. These are the ones that are particularly difficult because of their life cycle and where they live, where they tend to thrive. And with that, we encourage proper identification always. So as we've mentioned, a lot of the control strategies do differ even between various types of thistles. So proper identification is key. Like we've mentioned a lot, focus on reducing the seed population. For treatment options, consider what time you have available. If you can't go out there and till every 2 weeks, then tillage is probably not the best option for you. The conditions that you're in, if you have access to some equipment versus not, if you have access to where these weeds are growing, if they're in a big draw and you can't get to them with, by foot, maybe consider biocontrol and how frequent those treatment options need to occur. If it's once every month, if it's once every 2 years, that might change what option you choose. And then also applying the treatment method correctly. And that's not just with herbicides, that's even with, tillage or hand pulling. If you don't pull out a common mallow all the way down to the taproot, it's going to come back. So correct application of all treatment methods. And then the most important thing, and I'm so glad Jeremiah put this on there, is monitor what the effect of that treatment was. So we tend to remember things that we want to remember. So if you say that didn't work at all, or that worked great, monitor that objectively and repeat if necessary, but also be willing to explore other management options if what you're monitoring is not what you wanted to.
Yeah,
so, sorry, I put some resources over there on the right. Those are all specific links at goshenweedandpest.com. They're available other places. I just knew that that's where these were because I put them on there. So again, you can find all these with extension with these other agencies as well, but these ones are all specifically linked there. And sorry to cut you off, Jenny, go ahead.
No problem. I was just going to say that the points that were brought up earlier about competition is so critical in our area. So whether it's on rangelands, you need to have other things growing there, native plants that have been treated well that are going to take the place of weeds, because in nature, when there's a void, there will be a plant there if at all possible. And that's the same in landscapes too. I see it in my garden all the time. So if I don't have something that I want planted there, something that I don't want is going to come in, and mulching can be super effective after treatment to help suppress germination of many of these weeds in landscapes. But I also just wanted to share, we have some resources available on the website. Again, on the Barnyards and Backyards one, we have a page that's just on the weeds. And so it has information on getting started, general information on weeds. And then as she mentioned, weed ID is so very important. So you have a lot of information on there, including a link to Weeds of the West. If you have not seen this, it was formerly just available as a book, but if you pull that up, it is a fantastic resource. It has lots of giant pictures that you can look at that will tell you which weed is which. So that's very useful. And then some more information on herbicides and information on specific weeds that you might be interested in starting to control.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I agree with all those comments. It really starts off with managing that landscape, whatever it is. If it's your garden, if it's your lawn, if it's your pasture, if it's your rangeland, whatever land you are managing that for the desired species that you want there and promoting those species is going to be your first line of defense against any type of weed. The weeds we covered and weeds we haven't covered, right? Then if you do have some weeds, try and control the spread of them. Control the seed dispersal of that plant. Keep it from going to seed. That's the number one first approach or control for any weed. It doesn't matter. And then getting into those different control measures. And as I hope we emulated very well in this show, control measures are very plant specific, very weed specific, and that's why it's so important to properly ID that plant ahead of time. Then look into those control measures specifically for that plant. And even for myself, I work in this realm. I talk with clientele on a regular basis of IDing plants and helping give recommendations. It is hard. It is challenging. And so we do not expect you to be able to just ID those plants and just know it. So if you need some assistance, we're here. That's what we're here for. Our Weed and Pest, there's a Weed and Pest office and district in every county, so go talk to them. They are a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of resources, and a lot of times, if they're able to, if they have time, they'll come out and look at your property and help you ID weeds and help you with a management plan for your property. Same with your local extension office. We have an extension office in every county and one on the Wind River Indian Reservation, and we do the exact same thing. We are a wealth of knowledge. We're here for education. We don't always have the ability to maybe get out on your property, and so utilizing really good pictures, they got to be clear. If you can't identify what's in that picture, we're definitely not going to. Or bring us in a sample, especially for plants. They're easy. Bring us in a plant sample and we'll help ID it from there. It really helps. If you're going to do that, bring in more than just the leaf. Bring in more than just the seed head. The more, the better. So if you can bring in the entire plant and even parts of the roots, would really help us in IDing that. And the further along in maturity that plant is will help us. So the more flowers that are on there or getting to a flower stage would help us properly ID that plant and then help you give control measures from there. The other thing that I see is people will pick that plant, throw it on their dashboard and leave it there for 3 to 4 weeks or whatever it is, 3 to 4 days.
A day and a half in our weather is enough to just take it out.
It's gone. And so you bring it into me and it's like, what? I don't know what that is. And I don't want to open the bag. So, but try and bring us a fresh sample if possible. Try and bring us as much as we can. The more information, the better. And so if it is pictures and a sample, we're good with that. But we're here to help you. So we did not cover all of the weeds that are out there. We didn't even touch them, right? And so for your specific issues and weeds, please reach out to those resources for you. With that, I want to say thank you so much for your time, Jess and Jenna. Of course, Jeff, you and I, we're in this together, but I appreciate you being here too, bud. Jenny, thank you for the background. Everything you do there, connecting us to Facebook Live and all the tech support. So anyway, with that, thank you to all our participants. You're the reason why we're doing this. Everybody's welcome to join this. This is for the public, the residents, the landowners of Wyoming. That's why we're doing this show, especially those gardeners out there. This is just a way of us trying to connect to you. So thank you for joining us. With that, Jenny mentioned it. We record these shows. We edit them briefly, throw them up on the website for Barnyards and Backyards website. And so if you missed a show, if you want to revisit a show, if you want to share a show, we throw them up on there. They're on YouTube. You can watch them again and again. If you are interested in what we're doing future shows on, we also have a list there of what shows are there. Also, I think Jenny already showed that website of the local extension offices. Reach out to them. They're in your county. We talked about that. Same with weed and pest. Reach out to them. The last thing we have for you, we're doing this for you. We need feedback from you. We're doing an evaluation. Jenny has put that into the comments section and in the chat box. So the comments in Facebook and then the chat box here in Zoom. So if you have a few minutes, please click that. It's like 5 questions, real simple and easy. For those of you in Zoom, you will also be prompted in an internet browser with that evaluation. Like I said, it's real simple. Give us feedback. We appreciate it. That's why we're here. But with that, thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us. You guys have a great rest of your Friday and a fabulous weekend.
Thanks everybody.